Okay, so here's the situation. I set out to find out what is the strongest NPC in Bonelab, and I decided to do a couple of tests to try and figure out that, right? I set them up in such a way, and I shot them each with a pistol to figure out how many shots with a pistol it would take. I also dropped them from a huge tower and stuff like that to see who would survive the furthest drop. And I found some interesting results, but ultimately I kind of figured out something that should have been a little bit more obvious when I first downloaded the game, when I first played through the game. This game is pretty easy. The NPCs are garbage. They're so easy to defeat, they're so weak, and the maps themselves aren't designed in such a way where you're facing a huge amount of them, and that's the only time they're ever a big threat. So I want to kind of talk about that a little bit while also talking about some of the findings that I found, some of the stuff that I saw and discovered, because some of it is quite interesting. So starting off, which NPC can survive the most amount of pistol shots directly to the head or directly to whatever the weakest point of that enemy should be? That, of course, is the Steel Skeleton. The Steel Skeleton can survive 47 shots exactly to the head before it dies. It takes 47 shots to kill that thing. But that's actually not the strongest NPC when it comes to something like fall damage. When it comes to something like fall damage, where the NPCs were falling from a great height, this thing actually died a little bit sooner from a shorter height than the Void Turret. The Void Turret can survive the fallest. The Void Turret can survive the tallest drop from the highest height. It can survive when all these other NPCs can't. I set up a bunch of cylinders, you can see it here in the background gameplay and stuff like that. But the Void Turret consistently survived this huge drop, whereas the Steel Skeleton and the Crablets or the regular ones like Ford and the Gnolls and stuff like that, they died pretty early on. Even the turrets were dying before the Void Turret was, meaning the Void Turret technically is stronger than the regular turret, even though they die at roughly the same amount of shots to the weird orb thing. It's super weird, and that's one of the things that I discovered while testing this out. The damage seems to be a little bit inconsistent. Now, fall damage especially seems inconsistent because the Void Turret, when I was dropping it from the highest height that I set up, it was still dying some of the time. Just 90% of the time it wasn't dying, which means it would survive those drops more consistently and therefore be the strongest when it comes to fall damage. But for some reason, it also died some of the time, and I don't know why. Maybe I slightly made it up higher somehow. I don't know what I did. Maybe it depends entirely on how they fall on the ground, and maybe that is how they sometimes die, and that's why that seems inconsistent. But what's also weird is the Crablet Plus, you know, the huge Crablet, it also died at that same height, but also survived at that same height at least one of the times. The very first time I did it, it survived the fall, and then every time after that, it didn't survive the fall for some reason. So I don't know what I did there to make that work that way, but for some reason that also was somewhat inconsistent. Again, implying maybe it's just about how they fall, and maybe that's why sometimes they survived and sometimes they didn't. Some of the other things, though, died 100% of the time from the same height that the Void Turret did. Again, skeletons, Steel Skeletons, they died at that same height every single time, no matter how many times I did it. So it's weird, but for some reason the fall damage seems to be somewhat inconsistent, and I don't understand why. One of these NPCs, this NPC isn't dangerous in any shape, form, or fashion. It literally can't do nothing to you but like walk around, I guess, or like move around? I really don't understand. The Gnoll Rats, they also survive that maximum height 90% of the time. So I don't understand what's going on with them. I couldn't quite gauge how many shots it took to kill them either. It seemed like it would take one shot to kill them, and sometimes it seemed like it would take 2 shots to kill them or something. So it was really hard to kind of gauge on that, especially since after they're dead, you pick them up, they still make a noise for some reason. I thought that was super weird, but whatever. So yeah, going back to how many shots it took to kill these NPCs, things like the security guard, the peasants, Ford VR junkie, the null bodies, null body agents, all these like humanoid entities would die in 2 shots to the head, which I found very interesting because, again, the null body agent, I know for a fact I've spawned it before, and it took me several clips out of my gun to kill it, like several. But for some reason, in this test, when I decided to test it, I spawned 3 of them right in front of me, restricted them down so they couldn't move, and shot them each in the head twice, and they each died exactly 2 times from exactly 2 shots. So I don't understand what's going on with the null body agent either. And that's one of the things that made me wonder if there isn't an inconsistency across the board. Maybe sometimes a crablet dies in 2 shots. Maybe sometimes it dies in 6 shots, because when I tested it, it took 6 shots, which also I thought was very weird because I could have sworn I've killed it in a lot fewer shots before. So what's going on with that? Again, like things like the skeleton, I feel like I've one-shot these things before. I know for a fact I can one-shot them by punching them, but it took 2 shots to the head with them. Fire skeletons, which in theory are stronger, but they're not. They also die in 2 shots to the head. The turret dies in 6 shots. The void turret dies in 5 shots. At least that's what I figured out in these testings. But for some reason, shouldn't they die in the same amount because they're like made the same? And for some reason, again, the void turret, it can survive huge drops, but it dies in 5 shots. What's going on with that? I don't understand that either. The early exit zombie was one of the things that kind of stood out for me when it came to the humanoid creatures, because it died in 3 shots to the head rather than 2, which I also thought was really weird. So I don't understand what's going on with a lot of this. It definitely seems very inconsistent, but what I discovered here is that most enemies die in 2 to 5 shots with a pistol. This means that it's extremely easy to just spray down enemies regardless of accuracy. You can be extremely inaccurate and have some kind of assault rifle or something like that and just go brrr, and you'll kill like 2 or 3 enemies just like that. Super easy. Unless it's like super far away or something like that, right? Because that obviously would hurt your accuracy and it might make it harder to hit them. So things like the cultist, the void turret, the fire skeleton, the hazmat projector thingy, I forget what they're called, the corrupted null body, and the turrets, they're all ranged enemies, but they also die quickly. They also still die quickly. A lot of them die in about 5 shots. Some of them even die in 2 shots, like the hazmat thing, or the cultist dying in like 5 shots. This fire skeleton dying in 2 shots. These kind of enemies, they die super quick. The corrupted null body also died in 2 shots to the head, by the way. So all these ranged enemies also die extremely quickly. But not only do they die extremely quickly, you can block half of these monsters' attacks, half of these NPCs' attacks, like the corrupted null body in their orb. You can just block it with the gun you're shooting them with. Like, I can just hold out my gun, and if it hits the orb in the right way, it's not going to hurt me in the slightest. So it's so crazy. Like, just holding the assault rifle in front of you also protects you. So it's crazy to think that these things can be any amount of dangerous, right? And then you get into the fact that some of these enemies, like the skeletons, you can one-shot, like I said earlier. So some of them, like just using a default avatar that the game gives you, the heavy avatar, you can one-shot some of these enemies. I'm pretty sure I've one-shot null bodies and stuff like that by just punching them with that NPC, with that avatar. And so it kind of all collects into this one final thing, is that enemies are not really a threat at all. They're so bad. They're so terribly weak. And so I would like to see some kind of update that kind of works on this or something like that, or maybe changes some things slightly with some of the enemies or something. You gotta also take into fact as well that when it comes to things like the null body and Ford VR Junkie and the security guard and stuff like that, it's so, like, they can punch you and then break their arm doing it. Like, if you happen to block in the right way, they will take damage from it, and then they can't use that arm anymore. And if you do it just right and walk away from them, they might just trip, and now they can't get back up. So again, the NPCs are so garbage in this game, and I don't know why it took me doing all these experiments to kind of figure this out. But there you have it. That's what I figured out. Those are the stats and stuff like that for the different NPCs and how easy it is to kill them and stuff like that. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you think there is any way they can improve these NPCs or like fix it up in such a way where they're actually some form of threat. Because going back to it, like looking at old footage and stuff like that too, you can kind of just fly through it. Again, I did a pacifist run back in the day, like a long time ago. And for the most part, I could just kind of walk past the enemies. They weren't really much of a threat at all. So it begs the question, why is this game so easy? And not to mention that after a certain point, you get levels like Mine Dive, where there's no NPCs at all, and you kind of just walk through the whole thing, or you know, get on your minecart and just ride the whole thing. And then you get the go-kart level where you just drive a go-kart. Again, no NPCs or anything like that. Maybe throw in some NPCs there or something, or some more obstacles or something. But yeah, this game, I don't know why it took me this long to realize it, but it's extremely easy. And there you have it. Those are my findings. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and please do consider liking, subscribing, sharing this video around, or doing any number of those things like that, because it really helps out this channel a ton, and I'd very much appreciate all of that. So yeah, do all those things, because again, I very much appreciate it, and I applaud you. I thank you. Look at this. See, I'm applauding you right now. But yeah, do those things, and remember, most importantly, to stay asleep.